Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Black Menace. I am your host, Nisi Edwards, and my guest today is Tory White. She is a mental health professional and faith counselor. She is the CEO and owner of Creative Pathways Counseling and Consulting. Her mission focus is to provide guidance, education, and training for creative living in the many phases of life. She uses 4 pathways to resolve personal pain: balance, healing, integration, and wholeness. Tory believes that showing her clients how to use their creativity helps form new, healthier coping skills and gives new options for continued healing and growth. And she's also the director of her own ministry, Our Father's Business, where she supports women in business with personal growth. So welcome, Tory. Welcome to Black Menace. How are you today?
Thank you.
I'm so
well. Thank you. Thank you for the invite. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. I've been looking forward to it. So today we're going to be talking about loss and mental health, as well as healing, and mainly, I would say, self-care. So Tory, with everything that's going on across the country with COVID, many people are suffering in silence. Been a lot of loss of jobs, and unfortunately, many of these jobs may not return, or if they do return, they may return in a modified version where employers may not need as many people or head for. So we talk about life-changing stressors. What are some tips you have to help people navigate during COVID?
I think the biggest thing, Nisi, is the biggest thing that I see in my office is that, of course, everybody needs more care. And working remotely myself, I find that so many people need, that support and understanding. What I've noticed even before COVID is that it's a challenge culturally for us to be able to grieve our losses, but also to be able to take care of ourselves. A lot of times the knee-jerk response is, I need to put this away to another time. I'm just going to put this in a box, put it up in the closet, bury it in the backyard. I need to maintain my functionality and my ability to thrive. So I'm just going to put this on the back burner. And so what I realize, a lot of people that are having problems is that they put so many things on the back burner, Nisi, is that all of a sudden there's a catastrophe, even more that's what's happening now with the COVID, that there's such a level of overwhelm and sensitivity because we don't really grieve. We don't consider our losses. We don't take care of ourselves in our time of need. We have a tendency to either medicate it or push it down. And so that's where a lot of this is going. So there's so much loss right now and grief that is just overwhelming as far as the sheer numbers. I think we're over, are we over 90,000 now as far as deaths and growing, because there's a surge now since everything is opening up. And so it's just happening in just such rapid fire that, people are just overwhelmed. And so,
Yes, and I think you're right. I think we are over that number or close to it, or either have jumped over it. Each and every day is growing.
Yes.
So you said something interesting about grieving, and many times we do not take the time to grieve. And I think in the African American community, sometimes we may not have the time to properly grieve. And I say that because let's say you're someone that experienced trauma in your family. Let's say it was gunshot. Let's say it's death or loss, or because there's types of losses or whatever it is. Let's say you're a single mom and you've got so many issues going on that you're trying to focus. Sometimes it seems to me, Tory, that we just don't have the time or the luxury to just focus on self-care, even though we know self-care is so vital. I'm going to use my own self as an example. Several years ago, when I had a health crisis, it was devastating for me. And as I was struggling to come to grips with this crisis, I had a sense of loss because I had lost my employment due to my illness, and just trying to come to grips with all that. That for a while, I had a lot of anger and I didn't really address it because I was in so much pain. I
Yes.
did, I did not self-medicate. I didn't do any of that. But when you mention about grieving, I realized that I never grieved that loss. And
Mhm.
it hit me. It really, really hit me. So when you said that, it really got my attention. So grieving, I've heard some people say it's 12 months for grieving, but sometimes it can.
It could be, it really depends on the person. It really depends on if there's a single event, Nisi, versus an accumulated, losses of events like is what's going on now, where there's more than one family member being affected. So, the grief has steps. And people think that first comes the shock, then the denial, then the bargaining, but there's anger in there as well. So you mentioned anger, and people forget that anger is a part, of grieving, because there's some type of injustice usually that's related to that.
Yeah,
And then you get to the point, of acceptance. But sometimes you can get into, the sorrow, and then you can be angry, then you go back to sorrow, you pop into acceptance for a little bit, and then all of a sudden you get angry again. Or sometimes you'll go back to bargaining, if only, or if, oh, would have, could have, should have, done whatever. And so what I'm finding as far as people that I'm working with is complicated grief, meaning there's more than one avenue, there's more than one element. There could be a personal loss of a job, like you said. There could be a loss of a uncle or a grandfather, and then all of a sudden people are saying, well, but they were healthy. So you have people that appeared to be healthy, but then all of a sudden there's still a loss of a cousin, of a coworker. So now you have this complicated grief situation where you could be in different stages at any given time, because there's so much overwhelm, because there's so many people, so many things that are losses. And even the smallest of loss, we need to honor ourselves and to be able to grieve. And that just simply is leaning into it. And like I've lost my mother and my sister over the last 3 years to cancer and Alzheimer's. And clients were just so surprised when I was saying, well, I can't see you that day, I have to go to my grief class. And they're like, you go to grief class? You're a therapist, can't you just like help yourself? And I was like, no, it doesn't work that way. So even they call us wounded healers, and so there's a wounding that therapists have that turns into a passion. As we heal ourselves, we want to help others. And so there's a constant need for me to take care of myself, so that way I can be a support for others. So it's not just because something, that means you could help yourself all the way through it. Sometimes we just simply need help, and that's where the stigma comes from. Somehow in our culture, we're just supposed to be able to know how to do it all. We don't want a sign of weakness, or want to feel compromised. So sometimes we don't allow ourselves or give ourselves permission just to be vulnerable in our times of need and reach out to family or whoever the case may be. So, self-care defined, one of the simple definitions that I like to use is self-care is any intentional act you take to take care of yourself, either mentally, physically, emotionally. Um, and it is the key to a recovery. It is the key to any healing. So self-care is an intentional act that we do, that we utilize to take care of ourselves.
wow, that says a lot there. And when you mention about um, denial, that's a huge one right there, because sometimes we don't want to call a thing a thing. We don't want to talk about it. You kind of like the elephant in the room. You've heard the term the white elephant in the room that
Yeah.
everybody,
Or pink
or
or blue.
yellow or whatever, know that issue is there. And we are walking around the room, walking around that issue, throwing stuff over it, ignoring it, and thinking,
Yeah.
okay, up another day. It's gonna, the next day come, it's the same thing. And before long, you've got a bad situation on. Yes. And this is not easy either. I remember when I was going through my crisis, and part of that crisis, I was also bullied for 2.5 years. I had some people say, well, why can't you just get over it? And I thought, get over it? When something really hurts you so deeply,
Yeah.
easier said than done. And if you've never walked a day in somebody else's shoes that's going through that situation, it's easy for someone else to say, why don't you just get over it?
Yeah, it's very dismissive and minimizing, because it is a easier said than done. It's just like everything has its own process. And a lot of times we're impatient with the process. We just want to get over it. And so a lot of times we need to connect with people that understand, that can validate, our pain and can validate where we are. So that way they just simply, connect with us and just be a listening ear, versus saying something, judgmental. And that's how, unfortunately, something that we do to each other all the time. We minimize and discount what somebody else is feeling. And so on the outside looking in, we go in as a fixer. Well, you just need to do this and just get over it. Well, just do this. Well, don't think that way then. Well, why are you anxious? Well, just don't be anxious. Like, okay, that's not helpful. In other words, it would be more honoring by saying, I'm not equipped. I don't know what to do or say to help you, but I can help you find somebody to talk to, at your church, with a therapist, a life coach, someone, so that way you won't dismiss yourself. Well, it doesn't seem to be a problem to them, so I guess I just have to get over it. And all of a sudden there's a stuffing down, there's compartmentalizing, then all of a sudden it just gets pushed away. But the brain can only hold so much of that, especially if it picks it up as a trauma.
That's true. That's so true. I remember saying this before to people, that you don't know how close anyone is to the edge. And when you keep mistreating people and doing things to people,
Yeah.
that's piling it on and piling it on. And at some point, guess what's going to happen? You are going to break. You are going to explode. And I don't know of anybody who likes pain. I surely don't. And then the other part of this equation is, let's talk for a minute about the Black church. So in many Tory of our churches, when it comes down to mental health, we don't really talk about that. We don't really encourage parishioners to say, hey, it's okay to get counseling. It's okay to get a therapist. Because there are some things that you can't talk to your pastor about, because if they don't have that training, they really should not be giving you certain types advice.
Exactly. A lot of times that's where a lot of invalidating happens, because there's a lot of spiritualizing, and spiritualizing is using the word of God, but it's more of a destructive way. Well, you just cast your cares on him because he cares for you. Oh, well, you just simply need to forgive because everything is around forgiveness. And sometimes it's just like we do, between us and God, have to choose to release or forgive someone. But is incomplete in a lot of ways, because a lot of times there's not that person there admitting any guilt or responsibility. And so a lot of times if someone is not taking accountability, it is a more tedious process to release, even before God, that you go to God and I choose to forgive this person so I can, so God, that you can continue to forgive me. But then that doesn't mean that the feelings just immediately dissipate, that the pain just immediately dissipates. It is a process to walk that out, because the feelings catch up with your decision much later in a lot of ways, especially if that person hasn't admitted any responsibility or taken any accountability, for their conduct. And so it's not just a simple thing of, casting your cares. It is a process, because there's a mind renewal, that needs to happen. And so until the renewing of the mind happens, it's just like you're left with compartmentalizing it feeling like you're not a good faith person of faith, because it still resides and resounds in you every time that you think of that person, or that injustice. And so a lot of times it's a process, and a lot of times it's just put aside. Well, you need to take care of that sin. You're just resistant to forgiveness. Oh no, I made the decision. But sometimes we're not told, well, you have to be patient for the mind renewal part. You have to walk it out until the feelings catch up with your decision to forgive and to release. But
Yes.
sometimes there's a lot of condemnation. When you're stuck, it's just like it's natural for us to be stuck sometimes.
And also sometimes they'll say, you know, you're saying in the camp, you must have done something for this to be happening. And that's kind of like a whipping stick that
Yes.
it really shouldn't do that. And well, all that does is you're really hurting, you're going through something. And if there's no compassion, there's no empathy, there's no support, all that's going to do is just run people away.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no loving kindness.
Right.
Yeah.
And it does feels like condemnation. It does make people stumble and fall away, because it's just the criticism and the expectation, of those godly, leaders sometimes, that it makes it so one and done. Like, you have to do it immediately. And so there's so many things. It's just like, we have a process. It took what, Jacob 14 years to get from the prison to the palace. It's like there was a process of growth and maturity. And sometimes, everyone has a level of faith. And so if the person you're talking to has a higher level of faith than you, all of a sudden it's just immediately do this, instead of taking that person's faith and where their level of faith, the measure of faith is, and still cultivating and encouraging. And sometimes we just forget to encourage. So self-care is about encouraging ourselves, giving ourselves consideration, practicing self-compassion, which sometimes is just non-existent. Like, we can have compassion for somebody else in pain, but then we don't have that same compassion for ourselves, to realize sometimes it takes time.
Why is that? Because I see that a lot, where we can be loving to others, but when it comes to ourselves, we don't give ourselves a break. We just pile it on and say, I always tell people that there's power in words, Tory. I tell words have the power to lift you up, words to tear you down. And likewise, people forget that it rains on the just as well as the unjust.
Yeah.
So long as we're here on this earth, we're going to experience things, encounter things. And a lot of times it has nothing to do that you've done something to deserve it.
Yeah, so true. And so the compassion that we spread, and sometimes we can't have compassion for others, and we don't have compassion for ourselves. But I think, Nisi, speaking for me and just how I grew up, as far as, looking at the lives of, my family, we were little worker bees. Our grandfather was, very heavily based on, being kind to your fellow man. So it was heavy in service. He was a deacon in our church. It was all about service. There was always something in the community, or giving a helping hand to someone. And so, we always talk about, esteeming others greater than ourselves. And I was like, that's not what that scripture says. It says esteeming one another. So, sometimes there's just so much outward push in the church to serve and support, and being selfless, that as soon as we decide to start taking care of ourselves in a healthy way, all of a sudden we're guilted, and we're told that, oh, well, that's a selfish way to look. You're going to go do a mani-pedi in a time like this. It's just like, I have to take care of myself, And so, and a lot of times it's just like, oh, you do that? Oh, I don't even give myself permission to do that. Oh, wow, you allow yourself to do this, like to take a trip, to take a nap, or, It's just like, what is this condemnation about? And sometimes it's so imbalanced as far as focusing on others. But it's like if we're pouring into everybody else's cup and their cup is full to overflowing, and we look at our cup and it's just like no remnants of anything. There's like dust bunnies in there. It's just like we have to learn how to pour into ourselves, especially if we don't have others pouring into us. It's like, why are we walking around with an empty cup, pouring sacrificially to our own detriment to make sure everybody else's cup is full to overflowing and our cup is completely empty? It
True.
just not balanced, and you cannot sustain that.
And if my cup is empty, I can't pour into you because I don't have anything else left in me to give. I view it as, there are deposits and withdrawals. And if you are forever making withdrawals from me,
Mm-hmm.
my compassion account, my empathy account, my support account, and you're not making any deposits back into that, I don't have anything else left to give you because I've given you everything that I have to give.
Yes.
And then some. And then with some people, it's still never enough.
Never enough. That's where those toxic relationships come in.
Yes.
There's so much woundedness and brokenness and accumulation of grief and disappointments and so many things, and they haven't taken care of themselves. And then all of a sudden, they look at their outlook for other people are totally different, and it creates that hard-heartedness, and the cynical, aspect of, you should be doing this, and those are the ones that give directives that they're not even following in their own lives, and so they can't be helpful to you.
True. The other thing is I want to talk to you about is there is a higher incidence of trauma in the African American population. What can be done to help our community move forward? Because there's different types of trauma. There are some people who just every day is a trauma, whether it's a trauma that you leave your home, you may not be back home. You're going to be pulled over for anything, who knows, even chewing gum, it could be dumb that just doesn't make sense. And then our children are growing up to be totally traumatized. That has to take a toll on you and create dis-ease in the body.
Yeah, dis-ease in the body for sure, which creates disease. There's a lot of autoimmune disorders, even diabetes, high cholesterol. So many things are inflammatory related because that's what stress hormones have a tendency to do. And since we're hypersensitive, when we have been traumatized, when, things overwhelm us and there's different stimuli, sometimes it could be, yelling because you grew up in a household, where there was so much yelling, and all of a sudden, your heart starts beating and it's hard to breathe, and your heart is palpitating, and all of a sudden your stomach starts to bother you, and there's tightness and tingles, and your fists are, your hands are tightening up, and all of a sudden you may have a headache, or there may be a little tick, in your cheek, that all of a sudden that muscle group is, activating, because normally when we go into fight or flight, where, we determine, if we have a disturbing event or a disturbing memory that gets activated, the brain automatically thinks, okay, something's going on with her. There must be an axe murder. There must be a bear. She needs to run. She needs to jump. She needs to fight, kick, struggle. And then all of a sudden, we have all of these neurochemicals or stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, a host of other chemicals, and all of a sudden our brain is like, we need to be in survival protocol, life-saving protocol. And so all of a sudden, but what if it was just simply a thought, and that activates all of this, that makes your body think there's an axe murder, there's a bear, there's something outwardly, there's something outside of myself that's coming to threaten me. But wonder if it's an inside job. where it's just ran on emotions relating to an event that has been locked inside your body, locked inside your tissue. So a lot of times we go through days of all of a sudden your heart is just palpitating.
Yeah.
All of a sudden it's just the thump, the thump, the thump, like you could really audibly hear it outside your body. And so a lot of people don't even realize. Sometimes it makes us agitated. It's hard to catch our breath because all of a sudden our lungs are wanting to pant because again, there's life-saving protocol that the brain is firing off. So we can go through that once, twice, or several times a day. And that's where all of that unfinished business is because we're not taking care of ourselves. We're not slowing down. We're not getting help. And then all of a sudden we're just activated all the time. And so that recreates a lot of sleeplessness where people are medicating, drinking alcohol or doing something to stop all of this cycle from happening, or smoking, or gambling, gaming, whatever they're trying to do to avoid talking about certain things or sharing certain things. And the trauma just kind of goes down and the body calms down just to be elevated, in the next day. And so it's a big problem because a lot of times we don't even realize that we are dealing with trauma responses all the time.
You said something that was powerful when you said that our tissues, the memories, and
Mm-hmm.
our so when it's just to me, that's like saying you have an accident, right? Let's say it's an auto accident, and you get through that, and it was painful. You're in the car again, and you see a car getting too close to you, or
Mm-hmm.
it it remembers that, and then your body, like you said, that flight or fight response, it just kicks automatically.
Yeah. Yeah. An automatic response. All of a sudden, I'm in danger. And
Yes.
so some people, lose time, they dissociate because, part of the brain will shut down so they won't be overwhelmed. And so a lot of times, they're just spacing out. A lot of people say, I had this close call in traffic, that because I got hit a few years ago. And then they're like, and then all of a sudden I just found myself at home. I was pulling into the garage. And so all of a sudden they don't even remember the rest of the drive. They go into autopilot. We all know where we live, but as far as them being dialed in and aware, they weren't really aware. It was just like a homing pigeon. I got myself home, but I realized that I really wasn't, where I needed to be behind that wheel because I got so overwhelmed.
And
Yeah.
some we don't even remember how we got ourselves home because we're just so traumatized by the whole event.
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
about accessing mental health? What are some ways that people can go about doing this now, COVID as well as post COVID? Because one of my main concerns is if once we get past this, and it's probably going to be a long while because they're saying come, I believe, September, flu season or whatever, it could be another wave of this. It's going to make matters worse. I'm
Yes.
just for our community that it's going to take us a lot longer potentially to have to deal with this, especially if, let's say, you're a single mom, or even if you're not a single mom, you've lost your job, or they've cut your hours, money, finances, which is a huge trigger
Mm-hmm.
that you don't know where to go. You know you need help, but if you cannot get help from outside sources, that in itself leads to sleepless nights. And we know that if you don't sleep, your body can't properly heal. That
Mm-hmm.
can lead to hypertension because you're just so stressed out that now you got a problem with your blood pressure.
Yes. Yes. I think the biggest thing is acknowledging, that you need help. Sometimes we can't even get to that point. I could help myself. I know what to do. I know what's best for me. Kind of thing. I'm not telling anybody about my business. That's that old, adage. Keep it to yourself. Keep it within the house. Keep it contained. Um, And so I think the biggest thing, DC, is just to admit, that I do need help and assistance. A lot of people start at their doctor's offices. The biggest thing that I caution people about is, because we do follow the medical model, is that as soon as you say something about I'm having high anxiety, I don't know if I'm depressed, they'll ask you a couple of questions, and then all of a sudden there's a prescription pad that's
Yes.
whipped out. And so a lot of times, if we start medicating things before we actually get our voice out to be able to speak our truth and tell our story, a lot of times we don't even know what we're fixing. So I caution people, when you go to the doctor, you're looking for a referral or support. There's so many avenues and options out there. There's so many things cropping up, online as well, where these companies are saying that you could text someone, that you could Skype someone, and again, it's doing your research, because you want someone that is culturally competent. You want
Yes.
someone that's not just following a script, that's willing to listen to your story and start giving you, some things and ideas, to help you with as far as intervention. But you also want someone that can actually be able to screen you if you're dealing with trauma. Because a lot of times, until we get to the root of the situation, it's going to be hard, to get the needed and necessary help. So if you're just wanting, someone to talk you down, that's one thing. But if you want to get to the root of the matter, to get yourself on the healing path before we have to do this again, possibly at the end of the year, it's important to look for someone that's culturally, competent. And a lot of times, starting with your insurance, if you don't have insurance, determining, and just simply asking, a lot of these practitioners, a lot of these clinicians, if they have a sliding scale, because a lot of people are, doing that, to help and support, but everybody has their limits, as well, as far as how many clients they could take on.
That's true. And the other thing I access sometimes is when you mention about the cultural competence.
Mm-hmm.
uh, when I was seeking help at one time for a counselor, I had to go through several before I found the right one for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Exactly.
if you're already dealing with something that's caused you a great deal of trauma and stress, I don't want to go speak to someone who's going to look down on me or make me feel worse about myself. I
Yeah.
want who understands where I'm coming from culturally, whom can
Yes.
relate. You may not have gone through what I've gone through, but
Exactly.
at least you have an understanding of an awareness versus someone who may be living in an ivory tower who feels and acts as if, the sun sets and rises by them,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
okay, and they never have a problem and they look at you like you're crazy. So it's important, like you said, cultural competence, someone that you can relate to, and for
Yeah.
me, trust, because that's a huge factor.
Absolutely. And it's so important to realize that, there's different types, different modalities of counseling. A lot of people may use like a issue focus, like you want to talk about, one thing, and to, get, to be heard and understood, and that's all you want to work with, but a lot of times it's just like, even when you say I want to work with one thing, and then we start taking history, and then this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing, and so it's like, okay, where are you struggling the most? Is it grief? Is it, the way that your body starts to have tightness and tingle and spasms and things like that, that shows you that you're in your overwhelm? And I always ask people, what does your body tell you? When you get stressed, where do you feel it? Oh, I feel it in my stomach. Some people like, oh, I feel it in the back of my neck. My neck actually starts to burn,
Yes,
because our body gives us cues all the time before it goes into fight or flight, before it gets to that point of hypervigilance. A lot of times it may be squeezing your hand, or all of a sudden people may start tapping their leg or tapping their foot on the floor, or playing with their hair or fiddling with their fingers and things. All of that, it starts to relate, to overwhelm. And that's where we start the medication. That's why a lot of times people forego counseling because they try to handle their own situation. So all of a sudden, there's drugs, there's alcohol, sex, pornography, food, gambling, gaming. There's so many things to medicate with. So it's just like, I don't have time for this. I'm just going to numb it up. I'm going to medicate it so I can stay functional, and I'll just deal with this later. And so it is, counseling is a commitment. It's just like, are you willing to lay down some of those things that are actually making you feel worse? That's locking it in your system even more, your nervous system. And so it is at first a decision to realize it's not a one and done. You're going to have to be committed to yourself. This is a level of self-care that a lot of people are not familiar with. And you have to make that commitment up front that yes, you may have to talk to a lot of people. There's a platform called Psychology Today. I like to refer people to that. It doesn't mean that everybody's on there, but there is a nice sampling of a lot of people that you can determine the nationality, your faith. You could determine if you want to talk about depression or trauma. If you have insurance, you could plug that in there as well. If you want to see a male or female, and you put your zip code in, and it actually gives you an idea of who, at least that's on that platform, is in your local area, and if they have video calling, if they have a free first time consultation. And so that is something that you can utilize when you're getting to the point of thinking about, what counseling looks like, who is in your general area, that may be able to help and support.
That's very helpful. Thanks for sharing that. Now, I know some people have also done CBT, Cognitive Therapy, which, they have found to be very, very helpful.
Yes.
In our community, oftentimes we're marginalized, we're undervalued, we're underestimated.
And I've definitely underserved.
Yes, definitely underserved. Yes, that's a big one. And it don't matter sometimes whether you have insurance, if you don't have insurance. Sometimes it doesn't even matter how much money is in your bank account, because people are making value judgments based upon whom, whom is worthy and
Mm-hmm.
whom is not worthy. And that's so unfair, because I feel if you're going to be in certain professions, supposedly to help people or
Yeah,
to serve, it should not matter the color of anyone's skin. You're in the business.
that's right.
So if you're in that business to earn income for you and your family, your business, it shouldn't matter what color I am. I don't care if I'm purple, pink, or blue. It shouldn't matter to you.
Yeah, yeah. I have so many, comments from people that I support and see as far as how they're treated, by other therapists. And statistically, if you're grieved by, whatever your department or regulatory agency is in that state, there's a higher propensity of therapists grieving other therapists because they found out how they're treating clients. And because a lot of times people, clients um, being minimized and unsupported, a lot of times they won't grieve, the state as far as, I didn't have a very good outcome. This person, didn't support me. They're looking at me like I was an oddity. They never gave me homework. They never suggested books to read, and they just took my money. And so, but a lot of times, um, with colleagues, we try to give each other the benefit of the doubt. But that even surprised me as far as one of the trainings that I had. It's just like, usually we grieve each other because we find out somebody has just really stepped out of line and they're creating more harm. That is not the norm usually. Sometimes people just don't tell you that they are out of their realm or their scope or ability to help you, and they try to help you and they just don't understand. But regardless of who, what nationality I help, I let them teach me who they are and what their cultural norms are, so that way I could understand them to be able to support them. I always ask people, what faith do you follow? Even if you don't follow it, what did you grow up with? Try to be comprehensive at the very beginning. So if they're not asking you informed questions to learn who you are and to listen to your story in its entirety, then, it's less likely that you're going to get the help that you need. Because if somebody really wants to help, they're going to ask you, those questions as far as what makes you you. So that way they know your idiosyncrasies, they know, your challenges, so that way that they could be able to help you, with those interventions. But if they don't help you and they're just looking at you like you're some kind of oddity, or I don't know what to tell you, or maybe we could try this, it's easier for them to just say, this is basically out of my scope, because it's hard for me to put myself in your shoes.
And I'd rather you just be honest versus, I remember I saw someone once, and I knew from first visit, she and I were not going to be a good fit for one.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just the way, number one, she looked at me. She, she didn't really talk to me. She talked at me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like that, at all. And I decided probably within the first 10 to 15 minutes, I decided then I will not be back. This is not going to work for me. And like we always talk about people being our own health advocate, we
Yeah.
have to be an advocate too, so that if we know that, let's say we feel that somebody harmed us, because I've heard all types of things that have happened to some people, we have to speak up for
Yes.
one. I had a friend who went to see someone, Tory, and the therapist recommended that she asked her if she was married, and she says yes. And she says, well, you need to bring your spouse with you. My friend did not want to bring her spouse with her. She wanted just to talk about those things that was troubling her. And she knew that if she brought the spouse with her, she wouldn't feel, comfortable to really share certain things.
Mm-hmm.
It was a faith-based counselor, and they were different faiths. And my friend just felt so uncomfortable. And I said, that's okay. This is about you. If you didn't want to bring your spouse, you shouldn't have been made to do it. Find someone else. Maybe that's their method. Maybe that's their style.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I give people an option. People may say, well, I bring my friend because I want to talk about some challenging things, and I just need someone there with me. And this is your therapy appointment. And so if you want to come by yourself, if you want to bring, a friend or someone of trust, that is totally fine with me, because it's about them having, control over their own therapy.
Yeah.
Another thing, Nisi, I forgot to mention is determining clients' ACE scores. And it's short for adult childhood experiences. And
Okay.
so there's 10 questions that I ask people, and I've have training in this because this is another tool that I use to determine, what kind of comorbidity that is going on in a patient's life or a client's life. Can I share those with you? As far as those
Absolutely.
10 things. So it says, in order to get an ACE score, and there's 10 questions, prior to your 18th birthday, did a parent or other adult in your household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? Act in ways that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt. And so a lot of people, especially my African American clients, like, yeah. And so it was one of those things, but it's just like, did it, hurt or affect you, over, as far as
Right.
repetition? Did a parent, other adult in your household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, even hit you so hard that it left a mark on you, or you were injured? The third one is, did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or actually attempt oral, anal, vaginal intercourse with you? Number 4, did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other or feel close to each other or support each other? Number 5, did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had had to wear dirty clothes or had no one to protect you, that your parents were so drunk or high to take care of you, or take you to the doctor if you needed. Number six, was a biological parent ever lost to you through divorce or abandonment or other reasons? Number seven, was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her, kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes, or threatened with a gun or a knife? Some of these are kind of intense. I think that's the most intense one. Number
Yeah.
eight, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker, alcoholic, or used street drugs? Was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? And the last one is, did a household member go to prison? And so basically, Nisi, you add those up, and I add those up. And because there's studies out there, and Kaiser Permanente initially did this in the 80s with more affluent people that had insurance that would be able to answer these questions. And now they're doing it more as far as the disenfranchised communities that, that saw a lot of this stuff all the time. And the closer that you get to 10, it relates to, chronic morbidity, as far as the inability to lose weight, but also the anti-inflammatory autoimmune things that create more sensitivity in our systems to trauma, to, pandemics like we're having now. So a lot of times, before the 18th birthday, there's a predisposition, Nisi, of a lot of things relating to trauma, but also health problems. This is what creates the foundation of disease that turns to disease as we get older. If some of these things are not addressed and settled, because this is the root of a lot of things that we deal with today, as far as if we're medicating, if we're pushing things down, if we're avoiding it, if we're intentionally living in denial and we don't really want to be in reality. A lot of times, Macy, this is the problem. And these are, when I ask my uh, white clients this, a lot of times they may have one or two, but sometimes people have seven, eight, nine, 10. And that's where there's a lot of illness already. There's, blood pressure problems, there's
Yes.
fibromyalgia, there's all types of different, autoimmune disorders, colitis, things like that. And so, these are the things that are important for us to know about ourselves, realizing that a lot of these sad, stories that we don't tell, other people, that we don't even discuss it in our household, these are the things that can be locked in our tissue, that creates the reason why our brain is setting off these alarms all the time, because we are so predisposed and sensitive that we don't do enough self-care. We don't do enough self understanding, or self research. And a lot of times these things are, well, yeah, that happened. This is what my stepdad did. This is, yeah, there's a lot of people in my house that drank and all of this. I wanted to share that as well, because that is an important thing for us to know as a culture, because these numbers are really high in the African American and Hispanic population.
Yes. And my organization is Fibro Patient Education and Support. It's geared towards people with fibromyalgia. And as she was reading all that with the ACE scoring, what occurred to me is, with fibro, your pain is like a thermostat, except you can't turn it off with your central nervous system. And we are sensitive to everything. Somebody can get, let's say, a sniffle. With us, we're so sensitive. It's the flu. It just, from somebody can have something, they can just press them lightly.
Yeah.
I have allergy. You can press me, and to you, you may not feel anything, but for me, it's so much pain, because those pain signals are turned on. And these are questions that I think with the ACE scoring, a lot of people can relate to. I mean, if they were to be truly honest, think about when they were coming up, or even once they left childhood, becoming to adulthood, pain and unresolved issues still there, that no self-care because we've glossed over it, or like we talked elephant or whatever, we just said that's too painful. I don't want to go there, or you're told what happens in this house stays in this house. Just don't talk about it. Nobody needs to know. Well, if you're always told nobody needs to know, never talk about it.
Yes.
That affects our health.
Yeah. Because there's a level of arrested development that happens under the age of 18. Those are our formative years. And so if things happen to us early in life, a lot of times it stunts our growth at the point, of that incident happening, that trauma happening, that neglect or abuse, happening. And then all of a sudden, when we're triggered and when we're overwhelmed, Nisi, in such a time of overwhelm, sometimes we're, behaving, like a 9-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old. And all of a sudden, it's just like, how do we have skills to deal with challenging situations if our brain takes us to an earlier time of life when we were, compromised, and we can't think things out because we can't get out of that 9-year-old, 12-year-old, 14-year-old mindset because of the overwhelm that comes up. And so a lot of times, when I have couples in my office, it's important for me to know their ACE score. It's like, what did you bring? What generationally and what was inherited into your idea of closeness and connection that you can't connect with each other, you can't resolve because one person is triggering, the pain of another. And so they can't get to the conflict resolve. So they can't repair. They just keep bumping into each other's pain.
Yes. And no one should feel ashamed about getting some help.
No, all of us have, challenges, and issues. All of us do. And so it is a point of living our best life, reaching our destiny and the things that we aspire to do. If we have these entanglements from the past, there's nothing wrong, for being, when I see men, it's just like they want to be on their game. It's just like, what can I do? They're all, goal oriented. It's like, I feel held back, and that's what they want to do. And so a lot of times, is coaching them. It's just like, well, what do you feel is holding you back? And all of a sudden, and when I get in a crowd of people, I feel overwhelmed. So a lot of times I'll look at that ACE score and determine, when is the first time you felt overwhelmed? Oh, when it was 7 years old and we had a situation in my neighborhood, somebody got shot. There was a lot of people around, and I just don't do well with crowds and in social, places. So all of a sudden we have to go back there to get the release that he needs in his life right then. So it's just like, when is the first time you felt incapacitated in your life? We have to go back to that developmental age, clean up all of that to set you free in this current time. And so we just don't have enough freedom in this current time to deal with this level of loss in this pandemic, because sometimes with that arrested development, we don't have all of our skill set that we need for our developmental age today. And that's where people have just become so incapacitated. It's just like, we need that release. We need to resolve that instead of cover it up or try to bury it, because that really impacts us as far as our godliness, as far as our spiritual well-being, definitely our physical well-being, but as far as the mental well-being, it's just like, we could be living so much better. Why not us?
What I would like to see our government do, and as well as the insurance carriers do, is to add more money to benefits for mental health, because usually for mental health, you don't get that much. You may be limited to a certain number of visits. In addition to that, either you're in network or you're out of network.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, if you're in network, you're looking for the right provider for you. You may
Mm-hmm.
not be that person you need in network. So here you go now to out of network. Then you got this huge deductible. They may say, if you were in network, we may pay you, let's say 70-30 or 80-20. So now here you go over here to out of network, and they may say, okay, we're only going to pay 60%. You're going to pay 40%. Or they may say, we're not going to pay anything. And then you're screwed, because you need help. You cannot afford it because, number one, you got this huge deductible. And I would like to see them add more benefits for mental health, because this is something that's needed. Whether you were a gunshot victim, we hear all the time about those kids with the schools, who
Mm-hmm.
died at school or watched their classmates. Likewise, with this pandemic, there needs to be more resources geared towards mental health. We need to destigmatize that, because
Yes.
we need help. It is desperately needed. And questions for you. I learned a lot about you too. I know about your crafting, a lot of the things that you're into. Share with us about that, because when you share with me about the journals that you create and the classes you do for journaling, I find that to be very therapeutic, and they can help so many people.
Yes. I really enjoy. I love working with people individually, but I love working with groups, because when you work in, especially a small, small group, it's so much easier to gain that safety and intimacy. And so when you realize that you're not alone, and I open a topic as far as, recapturing your identity, or, perfecting self-care in your life, or even using creativity, to help you through trauma triggers. So I really enjoy helping people understand, that all of us are creative. And a lot of people say, well, I can't even glue two pieces of paper together. It's just like, it's so important to have a hobby, have something that you could pour yourself into to redirect you into a healthier headspace. And a lot of times, if we only think of doom and gloom, and, how am I going to deal with this? How am I going to heal from this? A lot of times it's just like, these are the self-calming things that we need to encourage ourselves, the good in us, instead of saying, these negative cognitions or ungodly beliefs about ourselves. I'm not enough, I'm not lovable. It's just so many things that we, say to ourselves, and they're just simply lies. It's things that we feel based on how we're treated by others, or based on what's locked inside of us, still yet to be processed. But it's so important to have a healthy, positive outlet. And so Creative Pathways Counseling was basically birthed because I realized my creativity and things that I was able to use, in my own healing journey, because healing doesn't stop. I'm still in my own healing journey myself. And there's something that I love and I assign to a lot of people, is letter writing, but also journaling. It's important to get things out of our head onto paper so we could really look at it. So I have people write lists and bullet points and things like that. So creativity, whether it's using your hands to paint, or to build things, or to, crochet, or to, work as far as woodworking. I mean, sometimes it is just the best thing, is while we're waiting, while we're learning to be patient with ourselves, while we're mastering self-compassion, let me do something that reminds myself the good in me, the things that I do well. And so it's so important to embrace something. Some people, have done cake decorating, and so they love to make extravagant cakes for, friends and family birthdays, or just because, this cupcake craze. Everybody, wants to learn how to, do cupcake design, and that entrepreneurship. It's like, what can I sell? What can I do for myself that I could, get money to fill my tank up, with gas. What can I cook? And people do soups and things like that. But I love paper, working with paper. I love altering things, using common things around the house. So I've taught, kids. I do classes for teenagers as far as self-acceptance when their peers are, so critical of each other. And it's a hard thing being in middle school and high school these days. A lot of times I open up creativity and positive coping skill outlets. And so I use that to show people, that they are creative, they have creative ideas. And we need creativity when it relates to having boundaries with others, but also being creative as far as what can I do, for my own self-care? What do I enjoy doing? And so I love, opening that up to people and sharing what I do, but also teaching, something to do with your hands, but also with your mind.
That's beautiful. At some point, Tori, I'm going to reach out to you and talk with you about doing a virtual workshop for my fibromyalgia audience. I know that that's something that we can definitely benefit from.
Uh, I would love to help.
Online? Can you do them online?
Uh-huh, I sure can.
Thank you. And tell us about your book.
So this is my first book, and while I was being a caregiver for my mom and sister over the last 12 years, my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at the same time my younger sister was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. And so things would come to me as far as just a caregiver and just challenges. And I would just start writing down. I was just felt like I was prompted to continue to write. And so this is the first of many, but it's called, I don't know why I'm looking at my notes, Our Best Years. Our Best Years, Chronicles of a Loving Wife. And so when I help women, they always talk about, there's so many things for the younger woman, but, for the 50s and 60s, there's not a lot of things out there for us. So
Yes.
what because I help a lot of women deal, with, whatever disparities as far as their personal lives, but especially women in relationships, as far as just the disappointments of dating and even marriage or more than one marriage. And so I decided to do a chronological, understanding of women, of us. And I use the word us a lot as far as what happens in our 20s, compared to our 30s and 40s. So a lot of times, with 20s, that's when, a lot of times we're getting married in our 20s. And there's just such vibrancy, and we want our career, and we want family, and we want love relationships, we want to be cherished. And a lot of times when we get into a marriage relationship, a lot of times things are immediately put on hold. And then all of a sudden, there's the dreams and aspirations kind of get put on the back burner. And then the 30s, it comes back a little bit, but a lot of times that's when a lot of stress comes, because you are, tackling, life with 2 or 3 kids, and then all of a sudden in the 40s, that's when all of a sudden, if things aren't going right in the 30s, start to get sick, in
Yes.
the 40s, as far as different diagnoses starting to happen. Things aren't right, your menstrual cycle is off, you're not sleeping very well. And then all of a sudden, 50s, people find themselves like, I've been married for 30 years, or I've been with this person for 15, 20 years. And then all of a sudden, am I happy? And what happened to those aspirations when I was in my 20s? And a lot of times we have to kind of go back and pay homage to that younger woman, to realize the things that we miss. So that way we could live the rest of our lives, making that the best of our lives. So it's kind of a chronological thing where I use my own personal stories, but also stories of women, and the trends that I've seen, over my career. And so I'm hoping that it'll be a help, for many, not just the woman in her 50s and 60s, but also for that 20-year-old, that 30-year-old, that 40-year-old, just to, learn and understand, if we don't correct things early in life, how it can start, to move us in a direction where we just simply lose ourselves.
Excellent points. And that sounds so awesome. I can't wait to work with you further with these groups and also for the book. Can you share with everyone should they have any questions where they can reach you?
I'm located in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and my website is torywhite.org, TORYWHITE. And it has all my information on there on my website. My phone number is, work phone number is 719-247-3731. You could also find me on Facebook under Creative Pathways Counseling. I post encouragement on there, but I'm actually going to start posting more since I'm going to be on my virtual platforms as well. And I'm also under Instagram under Tory L. White, and I'll be posting information there as well.
Perfect. It's been a pleasure having you today on Black Menace. I wish you well, and I look forward to a continued relationship with you to learn more about journaling and introducing my audience to you as well. Be blessed.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I so enjoyed supporting you today.